Hello greater YouTube area and the surrounding internet regions, this is Killer Cardinal DA7. Early this year, or perhaps late last year, I started seeing the term evidence-based pop up in conversations on the internet. Right away, I loved it. Not necessarily because it has a kind of backhanded snark to how it implies an idea is obvious because it has evidence, but because it highlights the fact that an idea has backup to show why it's true. Admittedly, my first handful of videos on this channel haven't come with much proof. Some links to videos, Wikipedia, which is usually mostly accurate even though it can be edited by users, Google searches, simple to acquire stuff overall. However, my videos come with an umbrella caveat that I want to be honest and upfront about if I haven't done so already. My claims might not be as informed as they could be. I could be wrong. And not only could I be wrong, but I openly admit to that possibility. I'm not a scholar, philosopher, intellectual, doctor, scientist, psychologist, and the only degree I have is a bachelor's in communication. I'm just a guy who wants to share thoughts and analyze things with a healthy community of people. The ideas I present may not always be original. It's entirely possible others have said these things before me, and when that's the case, I still want to emphasize those ideas as ones I support. So while I don't have decades of study on my belt, as the Rage Against the Machine song Fistful of Steel goes, I know the power of a question. When you ask a question, you present others with an opportunity to sound off about what they think. You present people with a wealth of options on how to answer. In retrospect, I should have taken way more psychology courses in college, but one thing I took away from the one intro to psych course I took is that the best way to study psychology is to observe, to listen, to watch. And asking questions gets people to show their hand, even in instances when they don't actually answer the question asked of them. The fact is, no matter how scholarly or learned a person is, there's almost always a question that can be asked that they may not know the answer to, or one they simply haven't asked or answered yet. Hell, sometimes study can get people more dug into their biases than just being open-minded and seeking out the answers objectively. The internet is absolutely infected with confirmation bias, and confirmation bias isn't irrelevant to experts and scholars simply because they study or do tests while on a mission to find the truth. Scholars and experts have data. They gather data. They have way more ways of gathering hard data than most people find poking around on the internet, and many of them have discovered things that most average dumb civilians, like yours truly, had no idea existed. That doesn't always mean a scholar or expert is the best person to analyze that data. They're smart, they have lots of information that we should absolutely listen to, but they're not immune to interpreting that data through a worldview that solidifies their own fears or predictions, and then feeding it to us in a way that convinces us that their interpretation is the most objective. Are all scholars and experts objective? I'm not a statistician, but I know the chances of that are pretty impossible. Does that make me the best person to analyze data? More than likely, no. I mean, I don't know if I am. I just look at things. I ask questions. I want to gather up evidence and look at what makes the most sense. Fact is, making a claim with little to no proof does leave room open for a person to be right. It's just a way bigger risk without citing why. I welcome all others to contribute to my ideas and questions, like I've said in other videos. Maybe we can all work together to figure out what's real, what's true, what's most accurate, what we all feel comfortable agreeing on. My goal is to figure out how to get everyone on the same page so the most people possible can join together to inspire real change. The term evidence-based that I mentioned earlier goes hand in hand with the idea that we're in a post-truth era. The idea that it really doesn't matter how much a thing is tested, proven, and put through its paces because as long as someone comes along and disagrees, it's not technically true. Contradictions run rampant these days. Say anything about any hot-button topic on social media and watch how people swoop in and disagree just because they can. I'm plenty guilty of it myself. That's not the main reason or the biggest reason. Part of the reason I created this channel is to disarm and deconstruct some commonly held beliefs and feelings that take minimal critical thinking to show why they're completely off base, in the hope that some real truths will rise to the surface so that we can all lay out on the table and address together. That means questioning most things I can get my hands on, up to and including my own stances, positions, and identity. However, just because I want to question as much as possible, it doesn't mean there aren't some things that are pretty undeniable. For example, let's start with me, the video I did about Colin Kaepernick a week ago. One of the main reasons I did that was, even though I started putting it together with simple ideas and wanting to respond to Sean King and Kaepernick's statements and actions, the more long looks I took at some of the video footage of some of the deaths they're trying to get justice for, the more undeniable some of it became to me. It made me more passionate to join the fight to help correct it. But, like the things I analyzed, I'm nowhere near flawless. I made a mistake. I didn't fact check enough. I said that Eric Garner was strangled after, quote, Ferguson, meaning after Michael Brown was killed, but that's not correct. Eric Garner was actually killed before Michael Brown was. I put a correction and explanation in the video's description and decided to leave the video as is. The point I was trying to make there was that others hadn't gotten the same wake-up call those things provided for me, albeit years later. And since Daniel Pantaleo was found not guilty in the Eric Garner case 1 week after Darren Wilson was found not guilty in the Michael Brown case, and after 2 of the 3 waves of protests and unrest in Ferguson, Missouri, I feel that the point still stands. Clearly the problems in Ferguson, Missouri that mirrored the concerns of many people across the country had not taught some people anything. It may take a while for things to sink in with me, but I can learn. I can accept where I go wrong on certain things, the mistakes I make, and I can change course. It's infinitely easier to admit fault when it's pretty inevitable than feign perfection. Unfortunately, I can't say the same for other people. Believe it or not, right now, at this very minute, we have satellites orbiting the planet Earth, taking pictures of the globe at various intervals. We have photographs showing the exact shape of the planet, and there are still people debating whether it's flat or not. Right now, a creationist is being walked through the Museum of Natural History. They're being shown real dinosaur fossils and how ancient primates slowly but surely evolved to the point of becoming Homo sapiens over thousands and thousands of years, and that person still believes we were created from sand and a rib at the whim of an invisible man in the sky. Evolution and the Earth being round, they say it's all a conspiracy. That's the government fooling us. What does flat even mean? Those big giant scaly things became birds, really? Not every sliver of evidence is a challenge to see how deep your convictions go. Photographs are usually pretty concrete when they come from the right sources. Fossils are usually pretty concrete too. If people can't be convinced by those things, it makes a person question why even bother to hunt down facts at all if it's going to be waved aside by simple things like dogma or defensiveness or a particular worldview or identity politics or a change in wind direction. At that point, there is no fact, just beliefs, feelings, personally infallible perspectives. How does that old saying go? Opinions are like assholes, everybody's got one? Yeah, absolutely 100% true. Opinions are like assholes, everybody's got one. At least one. Some people have more than one. Most of them are dirty, full of impurities and germs, and usually go unchecked until something really bad happens. And even then, it's like, nah, I know what's going on. I don't need to see a doctor. What do they know? I'll just look up on the internet. A significant part of the problem here is that some proof and some claims aren't standing on very solid ground and are often framed in ways that seem to be solid and plain to what people already believe or feel strongly about. And that lack of solid ground taints all other fact into looking less true, even when they're not related. I'll give you an example. Not too long ago, two different friends of mine on Facebook at different times shared two different articles that claimed, quote, half of U.S. adults believe women should be required by law to change their last names after marriage. I linked a version of this in the description. I don't know if this is one of the exact ones that I saw, but it's still a perfect example of what I'm talking about. I'll break it down to show you what I mean. The article I'm starting with is from bustle.com. The article itself is incredibly long. Most of it is composed of sarcastic jabs at patriarchy, and only mentions a study done to prove what it says in the headline in the very beginning. In the first two paragraphs, there are 4 links. 2 of these links take you to other different articles on the same website, which proves absolutely nothing, basically just self-promotion for more clicks and recycled impressions. The first 2 links, however, take you to a different website, refinery29.com, to an article titled, Half of Americans Think Women Should Change Their Last Names for Marriage. So already backing off the headline claim by removing the by law part, which in my estimation is the most punchy part. The first link in the Refinery 29 article, and the sentence mentioning the study, takes you not to the actual study that proves this massive claim, but to an abstract of the study. Which, if you aren't familiar with how scholarly journals work, an abstract is a part at the beginning of the study, essentially summarizing what the study is about. It doesn't say anything concrete, but does sum up things before you dig in. So upon finding link after link to just the abstract, which is also not enough to prove a damn thing, I had to copy the actual journal citation from the abstract and paste it into Google, which led me to Springer.com. That's the third site I hadn't heard of before putting this together. And that had an article from Heidelberg, whoever or whatever that is, discussing the study that these articles are referencing in slightly more detail. Keep in mind, we're now multiple generations out from the original article I cited. But finally, some sliver of something concrete. The source of all this appears to be a study conducted by a woman named Emily Fitzgibbons Schaefer about Hillary Rodham Clinton. The study looked to determine if a woman's last name changes how people view her as a wife. In other words, whether there's a different perception of her based on if she A, keeps her name after marriage, B, hyphenates her last name and her husband's last name, or C, if she changes her last name to her husband's last name. Then it mentions text and vignettes that people were exposed to and then questioned about in order to make the assessments. 1,243 people from a national sample were surveyed by a, quote, paid survey firm, and this sub article I had to look for on my own unfortunately doesn't mention how many responders exactly answered with, quote, women should be required by law to change their names value. It just mentions that women responders didn't see a name change as a big difference. While men of lower education levels, whatever or however that was determined, A, saw a woman who didn't change her name as implying that she is less committed to her family, and B, claimed a man married to a woman who didn't change her last name had more grounds for divorcing her. Whew, so there we go. It's a little bit of actual data. I guess that's something. Even though this half of Americans number kept coming up, the only place it's really quantified is in the second article from Refinery 29, and it's a bit disjointed. After mentioning the study it hadn't referenced yet, it says, quote, it found that despite all the gains we've made during the past 2 decades, more than 70% of U.S. adults believe that a woman should change her name after she gets married. More surprisingly, about half feel that it should be required by law, which is terrifying, unquote. Maybe the actual study gives an actual number. A little hard to tell without the data to look at, but according to what I read about the study, most of the responses are open-ended and thus up for interpretation. So if they're not going to share this information, why don't we do some interpreting? About half feel it should be required by law. Okay, well, about half probably means less than. Stuff is always inflated to make them sound stronger. And 70% of US adults think women should change their name. Honestly, that's not surprising. It's been tradition for years, decades, centuries perhaps, and plenty of women get married these days and don't change their name. Both have precedent. That 70% value in the Refinery 29 article means absolutely nothing, and the half part is negotiable. Let's say for the sake of argument that I found the real study. I didn't. And let's say it verifies that half number. That would mean half of that national sample would be about 600 people. This should be obvious to you, but 600 is not a lot of people. There are about 319 million people in America. I looked it up around the time of the presidential election. So after a little calculator button mashing, about 160 million people are having their opinions presumed as a result of only 600 open-ended responses up for interpretation and exaggerated due to this little article-based game of telephone. Does that seem unethical or shitty to anyone else? Now I realize that by debunking this article or questioning in any way, there may be some who are interpreting my actual stance on this, so let me clarify. Women should not under any circumstances be required by any law whatsoever to take her spouse's name when getting married. If a woman wants to follow centuries-old tradition and take her spouse's name when getting married, she's more than welcome to do so. Same for women who don't want to change their name when getting married. They're allowed to make that decision as well. Name changes should be mutually agreed upon between those people getting married. Whatever both people want. It's untraditional, but some men change their names these days. Sometimes both spouses change their names to something brand new. Uncommon, yes. Unheard of or expected, no. Like I said, it should always be a mutual decision decided by both, or in some cases, all parties. So by questioning these articles in the study they mildly refer to, I'm not trying to diminish the importance of what the articles themselves want to discuss. This is 2017 America. Do what you want to your name, marry who you want. The important part is that you and your spouse are comfortable and agree on what you do as a partnership. Don't feel overly pressured into either following tradition or shattering it if it's strongly against what you want. Find someone who is on the same page as you. That's what's most important. But see, that assumption you may have made as a result of me questioning anything about those articles, that's part of why proof is on such shaky ground. I can deconstruct those pieces in study with little to no effort. It looked like more work than it was because I described it all verbally. But someone hearing this may think I'm taking a stance on women's rights. I'm really not. I agree with the main sentiment of the articles, not so much all the sarcastic jabs just to be funny or trigger a reader, but the basic idea. Women should not be required by law to change their name in marriage, and it's questionable to think that if a woman doesn't change her last name when getting married, that her integrity as a partner is in question. When you get married, you create a union, but you still need time to yourself, your own goals, your own activities, some sliver of your own individual life outside of the partnership, and sometimes a person's name is part of that. It's completely understandable. The study being cited, however, was either misused or just plain not informative enough. Hopefully the actual study data verifies that half number somehow, and at least some of those open-ended responses were provided word for word and stated, quote, required by law to give any proof for those articles to be written about it. I'm not saying everything that appears on the internet needs attribution. Not everybody's a journalist, but if you're going to make that huge a claim, you need to provide some more concrete proof. Though I guess maybe you don't, because there's at least 2 articles doing it. Google the headline. You'll find other websites posting a similar story written by other people worded slightly different, likely referencing the same exact study, which in itself is pretty incomplete or not thorough enough to really prove anything. Studies and tests are absolutely important to ensure people's claims are backed up with evidence, and preferably the evidence should be airtight. The simple fact that a study is done doesn't mean the discussion is over. There can be wiggle room in what it determines. And we all need to look deeper to tell conclusively when that wiggle room exists and when it doesn't, as opposed to just being triggered by things that poke away at issues we're sensitive to, and then share without looking at things more critically. How many people read that first article and didn't do a single bit of fact-checking or digging and are now walking around this nugget of, quote, fact in the back of their minds that half of Americans think women should be required by law to change their names when getting married? Hell, I want people to fact-check me. Had someone brought my Eric Garner botch to my attention before I mentioned it myself the day after I posted it, I would have admitted it, corrected it, fix the problem, broadcast my fuck up, whatever else I could do. But I'm just one person doing that. How often do you read an article online, then a week later you get a notification on your phone, hey, just FYI, we wrote something incorrect in that piece you read about this or that. Here's the real info, just letting you know. I haven't looked at your phone, but I know that never fucking happens. Meanwhile, a ton of people are walking around with the idea that half of Americans think women should be legally required to change their name at marriage. That's not even true. 600 people believe that at best, and depending on the way the questions and the assessments were worded, or how the responders felt when they answered, or what they actually said, even that statistic of 600 people is likely very exaggerated. The study itself that inspired these articles isn't even presenting an accurate cross-section of half of America. The best thing any of us can do is just apply some critical thinking to see what kind of study or evidence is being presented, use some good judgment to figure out just how strong a case is being made, and put the time in to peek down the rabbit hole. Arguably, it's not a great analysis or debate tactic to simply discredit people or sources, I admit, but when one goes for shocking clickbait and outrage before getting to the real facts, it needs to be called out by all of us, not just a few people. simple. As I discussed in a previous video, if your beliefs or feelings are strong enough, no proof will move you. In an ideal situation, strong proof would always be provided with arguments, and proven arguments would always be able to move all of us in the same direction, above and beyond our personal beliefs, feelings, and worldviews. I'm not a conformist, but facts themselves aren't special or unique to different people. Facts are just facts. Often, though, people dig their heels too far in and refuse to change for anyone or anything, including facts. They'll just keep rooting around in the net until they find, quote, facts to prove what they already think. Ta-da! Confirmation bias. There it is again. This isn't to say we shouldn't be looking for facts all the time, though one of the reasons I try to keep my own arguments as surface as possible without relying on facts or proof is that much of the time it can be really shaky, like I said. Here's another topic that comes up a lot in discussions: addiction. On Facebook recently, I saw someone share a video that mentioned that when small children use smartphones and electronic devices, their dopamine levels matched activity in brains addicted to cocaine. South Park, one of my favorite social commentaries of all time, did an episode where they took on free-to-play mobile games that lure you in with initially harmless microtransactions, claiming dopamine levels spike when acquiring items and or making purchases. John Oliver on his show Last Week Tonight did an episode on sugar, where an expert mentioned at the very beginning that ingesting sugar causes the brain to match activity when ingesting cocaine, seeing a bit of a pattern here. Now, applying the same type of thinking as I did with the previous topic, I don't want to imply things like sugar, smartphones, and games aren't addictive. They sure as hell can be. In the South Park link I cited in the description, Stan says the following to Satan. So what does that mean? I can get addicted to everything so I can't enjoy anything? Satan corroborates. I agree about half as much. Yes, you can get addicted to everything, literally everything, not just drugs or substances that directly fuck with brain and body chemistry, but everything up to and including everyday things we do all the time. Even healthy shit, hobbies, foods, exercise, work, places in the world we visit. Oh, and when your chosen addiction is combined with other psychologically attractive prospects, there's no stop to it. Emotions, speaking out, interacting with other people, performing, protesting, fighting. These things not only give people a convenient dopamine boost that we all hunt down, but why not throw some direct positive feedback on that pile? Validation, encouragement, things that people always gravitate toward, whether consciously or subconsciously. Those are just as addictive as any substance or chemical. I'm not a doctor, but watch how friends, relatives, and strangers online behave. Many chase and defend their favorite things in the same way addicts do. None of those claims about getting addicted to things is necessarily untrue, but by the looks of it, none of those things are individually more addictive than the other. Sugar isn't poison. Eating and drinking it in small doses is perfectly fine as long as the person ingesting it is aware of how much they're taking in. Smartphones and social media use, same thing. We all need time to disconnect and instead interact physically, face-to-face with humans outside of our forums, communities, safe spaces, and Twitter feeds. As long as you do that, you're fine. And games, whether console, PC, or mobile, are harmless if we're able to separate ourselves reliably from the fantasy worlds and reward loops and dopamine shots we get when we collect loot or treasure or progress. I'm currently working on that one myself. It's complicated, you understand. I can quit whenever I want. Anyway, while cocaine is way more addictive than sugar, smartphones, and gaming combined, those three things are far more common for someone to be taking in than cocaine. Cocaine may be the comparison in at least two of those examples, but cocaine is also a street drug, one that the majority of average civilians never see in their entire lives, that comes with typically negative connotations. I mentioned moderation a moment ago. You're never going to see a video shared by a friend talking about how a little cocaine in your glass of wine with dinner is actually a great way to lower cholesterol. So okay, when taking drugs, moderation may not help. In terms of more common everyday things, it's pretty much the key to enjoying them guilt-free. When broadcasting the idea that sugar and smartphones are like cocaine, the idea that those things are horrific undoubtedly rings loud for people looking to prove those things are bad to others. There are unquestionably people who see those things as far more dangerous and harmful than simple bad habits. The people who see them as bad see those videos and they proceed to demonize those things. Or worse, they're just really weak-minded and do those things all the time, but then, oh shit, they see that video saying they're bad and oh no, it's over. And then they go cold turkey on them thinking any contact is a death sentence when they're not fucking death sentences. That's the untrue part, and that is the fault of people who are afraid of the power those things have over us. If left unchecked, yeah, they can dig their heels in nice and deep and grab a hold and not let go. That's the point here. They can be addictive, they're not guaranteed to be. The fact that in our brains a chemical is produced when we experience those common things that creates the illusion of pleasure similar to the feeling of ingesting an illicit street drug, that is very likely to be true. I'm not doubting that part. I completely believe that part is how brains function. However, moderation is the key in just about every case of common everyday things being addictive, and especially knowing that it's mostly just chemical reactions we go through, it should be easy for us to deprogram from being addicted or thinking they hold unbreakable power over us. Some people need to watch out for it more than others. This is also true, and some people very likely can't touch some of these things because they don't have strong enough self-control. That's not a judgment either. Some people have less tolerance or self-control or stronger vulnerability to addictive tendencies, and that's completely okay. Part of moderation working is being aware of the potential for things to be addictive. What's harder to be aware of is our own personal levels of self-control, being aware of when those things are being pushed to the brink, but most of all, being aware of when we need legitimate help to kick those habits because those habits are impacting our real lives. The first step is asking yourself the same questions I've been asking myself about my life, my habits, my levels of tolerance and control. Where do I stand? How much can I handle? handle, etc. Like I kind of joked about games, I really do need to dedicate more time to disconnecting and spending time with loved ones face to face. I'll gladly acknowledge that is a problem I need to work on. I've been gaming most of my life. It's tough. It's my typical go-to for comfort and relaxation and alone time. Part of my reason for being here on YouTube though is to work through a bit of that and to affect people's lives outside of games, so I'm at least trying. Let me reiterate here. Studies and evidence are not the enemy just because more information may be needed to make what they seek to claim true, and certainly a study isn't garbage just because one person pops up and exclaims, "I'm an exception." Most times a study or claim has something true about it. We just need to figure out what the truth is that we can apply more generally. Like I said about the article about women being required by law to change their name when marrying. While it is scary to think that some people believe it should be a legal requirement, the untrue or misleading part is that by inflating those 600 responses to represent half of Americans, a thought as simple as women should change their name at marriage, which most times isn't carved into stone for people, gets boosted in intensity merely by the study's implications to make the issue way more of a problem than it actually is. And the truth is, it's not hard at all to see that an article like that functions from two things. The writer's fears and insecurities about the state of the country, but also the greed from the advertising that gives those fears volume. These have since changed, but at the time when I found that first article from Bustle.com I've been talking about this whole time, between all the snark and satire and lamenting, there were numerous banners for a show called Tagged, T@GGED, which could be viewed on a free website called Go90.com. Apparently I now have a Go90 app on my phone. For the record, I have absolutely no idea how it got there because I sure as fuck didn't download it. But anyway, Tagged is, quote, a modern-day thriller that explores the terrifying risks of social media in a world of anonymity. Found it on the internet. How ironic. Looked like it had episodes attached on a Netflix-like interface. Then at the bottom of the Bustle.com article, in between links to other articles on Bustle.com were, quote, tech links sponsored by Samsung Chromebook Plus. Should I assume Samsung is taking a political stance with this sponsorship? Who knew a Korean company like Samsung gave a fuck about the rights American women have when they get married? A different episode of Last Week Tonight with John Oliver is all about sponsored content on the internet, how we often see things that look like articles, but we miss the little advertisement text notices in specific spots that basically tell you this piece was written by somebody paid to write this in a way that generates attention to the ads. In a sense, it's telling you, look, you're here because one of your insecurities was successfully triggered and now you're spreading ads around in social media without even realizing it. And no, conservatives and patriots, triggering isn't the exclusive property of liberals or snowflakes or the overly sensitive. Remember how you felt the last time you saw an article about the NFL protests or a cop being attacked or Trump being criticized in any little way and you immediately clicked it, commented amen, and shared it to your social media wall or feed of particular choice unconditionally without any question or concern? Explain to me how that's not triggering. Donald Trump has been very busy in past months calling out fake news, mobilizing legions of conservatives or conservative-leaning folks to doubt pretty much every major news outlet except Fox News, Breitbart, and Alex Jones' InfoWars, up to and including inciting rage against CNN, one of the most reliable news networks in history. Now granted, CNN is a 24-hour news network, and with any 24-hour news network, some of the things they say will be wrong. And lately they've been guilty of plenty of things being wrong. They needed to backstep certain stories or claims, so yeah, they aren't immune to being wrong just because they have a good history and reputation. CNN is the news. They're journalists. Everything they say should either be true or verifiable. As a TV network, especially in the past decade, they seem to be prone to the same sensationalism and ratings fiending as any entertainment network. I've been seeing enemies of the left wing calling CNN fake news, while apparently Fox News is allowed to legally be considered an entertainment network and is considered the heavenly herald of truth, justice, and the American way. I'm perfectly willing to call out big news networks on bad practices, even with a pedigree like CNN has. If CNN's guilty of misinformation, they should be punished or held accountable like any network should. But when people parrot Trump's accusations and then call out CNN but don't also call out Fox News when their anchors immerse themselves in conservative rhetoric and barely check any of their facts before towing the Republican line, the inconsistency is pretty clear. It isn't fake news that's the issue for some people. It's news that questions their beliefs and identities. If liberals prefer CNN over Fox, that's fine, but if they engage in bad practices, call it out. Same with Fox. If they get shit wrong or sensationalized, call it out. Cut out the partisan bullshit. Call out bad practices where they exist. All in all, I don't think major news networks and the bulk of mainstream media are completely full of shit. Just like when I read an article and can see some bit of truth in it even though the proof is questionable. When I think of the idea of fake news, sponsored content on the net is typically what I think of first. Pieces that seem like they're powerful, poignant statements about society, but in reality may not be a fraction as passionate about the issue in question. Ever ask yourself who the people are who write these things? Do you ever click on their names? I do. Results weren't surprising. The article from Bustle.com was written by a woman named Megan Grant. You click on her name, it gives a short bio that reads, quote, I graduated from U of Michigan with a degree in communications. My biggest passions are writing, reading, and Olympic weightlifting. There's a link to her personal website, megangrant.net, which looks kind of like an online visual resume. That's not a judgment, that's just what it resembles to me. The About Me section of her site has has a lot more info on her, which is great, though no website with articles like bustle.com should require that many click-throughs to get you information on the person who wrote an article you just read. The Refinery 29 article is written by a woman named Natalie Goncharova, and when clicking on her name, you get a photo of her, a list of her articles on Refinery 29, a banner ad for Ulta, and a banner ad for Smirnoff, which also may have changed since I found them. No other information. You know, when I think about it more, maybe there is some grounds to this fake news idea. I hate to agree with anything Trump says, but advertisers pay people to write pieces on the internet to carry their ads, right? But most TV shows do the exact same thing, don't they? I learned about that in college. TV shows that we watch for entertainment are vehicles for advertisements. We think most networks are there to entertain or inform us, but quite the opposite. Entertainment or information is merely what gets us to watch for the ads. Why do you think premium channels like HBO and streaming services like Netflix don't have ads, or ads mostly for shows and programs on their own service? Because you're paying them directly. TV news has effectively been sponsored content before sponsored content appeared on the internet in written form. I mean, ask yourself what's worse. Stuff on the internet that's written better than most people can write, and so average readers just assume they're official and true because I read an article, or the fact that on TV the people are recognizable. You feel like you know the news anchor that's giving you the heads up on what's happening in the world. You trust that person. You've seen them before. They're your usual source. You practically have a relationship with that person. And let me tell you, that person on TV that I have a relationship with, I don't make bad decisions about my relationships, okay? I trust the right people. What do I look like? Some simple-minded buffoon that listens to everything people tell me? Well, I'm not, okay? Not everything TV news says is a lie, much in the same way sponsored content on the internet might be rooted in some bit of truth. It is on our shoulders to figure out which is which. When they're framed in ways that draw you in, you become vulnerable to believe what they're feeding you. You may be saying to yourself, well, Killer Cardinal DA7, how is that any different from what you're doing? Aren't you making money from being on YouTube? Aren't you some rich lazy bastard like that Nazi PewDiePie? At the time of this recording, I haven't made a single cent. I've made a conscious decision to handle my channel this way overall without any expectation of making any money at all. Am I opposed to making money off this someday? No. But if I make any money from this endeavor, I want it to be through actual people who support me. Am I closed off to any possibility of sponsorship down the road? Not entirely, but it's got to be stuff I use or believe strongly in, and that sponsorship won't at all be affecting what I say. If a sponsor is worried I could say something negative in a video not even about them, like this whole adpocalypse situation going on YouTube, they're welcome to pull my money. What I say here is what I want to say, and if that gets me in trouble, I'm fine fading back into obscurity where I started. My income is fine where it is. I don't need this to make a living. This is just a platform to share and engage. So no, it's nothing the same. No one will be pulling my strings and changing my opinions unless we get into a real discussion or share some ideas or meet our minds. But even then, my strings aren't being pulled so much as I'm moving my strings in a different direction consciously and hopefully moving some strings while moving myself. One last John Oliver clip I want to link in the description. Please don't get me wrong, I don't worship at Oliver's altar. A broader overall point here is that regardless of how much integrity comes with different types of proof, there is usually at least some truth to it. Keep that in mind. John Oliver may mock and joke a significant part of his show away, and it occasionally detracts from the strength of his points for some people, but there are some truths and facts buried in between the irreverence that's completely worth taking in. Last week, tonight, I recently did a piece on Sinclair Broadcasting Group, which, if you don't know who they are, they're the largest owner of local TV stations in the country. The clip proceeds to show distinct examples of when local news stations and programs are directly influenced and told what to say. Numerous news stations saying the exact identical words for the same exact story, many of those words being purposefully loaded, emphasized, and accented to get you to lean a certain way with your perception as a viewer. Like I've said numerous times, and it definitely bears repeating, not every single story broadcast in the media is entirely false, but there are plenty of media outlets, both big and small, corporate and local, that seek to manipulate what you feel and believe, and it's arguably difficult to pick through the fluff and see the facts for what they are, and then use those facts how they need to be used, especially when they prey on your fears or puff up your stances as if they know you. Proof is unfortunately a trickier issue than I want it to be. Ideally, proof would be the end game for arguments, right? Two people talk, one says something, someone has proof, they're proven right, both parties move on from there together because that proof proved one of them right. The person who was wrong admits they were wrong, life goes on. But people end up sticking to their guns too much to give even an inch to another party. Or they're too dedicated to beating the other person in a debate or other intellectual competition to the point where it's hard to tell which proof is actually convincing and which is exaggerated or inflated. And then it's hard to tell whether the people debating the issue are really interested in finding an answer or if they're just concerned with having their ego stroked about being right. I mean, how often do two people debate and the loser in the debate ends up conceding entirely to the winner of the debate, and they change their worldview or opinions as a result? If you said never, or at least highly unlikely, you'd be right. So maybe this should be a discussion about truth and fact more than proof. If we were to discuss what's easier to find, proof would win that battle. Proof is everywhere. Truth and fact are harder to nail down, but then again, they're also more open to interpretation at times. Depending on the topic or scope, one person's truth isn't the same truth to the next person, which is probably why many of us are so eager to argue or contradict what someone else is saying. I mean, they have to be wrong about something. They're not right about everything. What do you think they are? Perfect? I know I've been there. You know you've been there. But how much time are we spending acknowledging where another person is right? How much time do we dedicate during our usual social media scrolling to telling one or more people who don't fall into our personal demographic, "You make a really good point"? It's hard for me to hear, but you're right in a way. And even if you're like me and you don't do a ton of reading, you're not busy studying the finest writers in history to learn as much as possible about psychology and society, etc., and you read an article and just go, "No, that's not really true," but still find a way to meet someone in the middle and say, "That article isn't really true, but I see what you're getting at." It's been my experience that jabs often get thrown far too quickly, but when you meet those jabs with a little care and honest empathy, they tend to stop, or at least slow down. You don't have to tell that person they're right about everything, but if we expect people to validate everything we say while spending every minute slashing other people's arguments in the kneecaps, we're not likely to get back much. Honestly though, I can't decide what I want to see more, everyone agreeing on common truths, or fact being the end to all arguments. Like I said, I'm not a conformist. I encourage people to have different views and opinions, but if everyone agrees on simple things, doesn't that mean things are peaceful? We have order? We all support the same image of our country, society, law, etc. Then again, as I said, people identify with a fight more than a solution, so if truth is a solution, I wouldn't doubt people may sometimes be subconsciously sabotaging their journey towards it. If fact were the end of all arguments, it'd take a hell of a lot longer to get everyone on the same page, but maybe that would bring about that agreement I want to see. It should, anyway. The fact is either hard to nail down or occasionally it changes. Something you knew one day might be different the next day. It happens, but some people don't always accept that. They don't always accept when facts change, and sometimes they don't accept when things can change. Barely anyone really does. Not enough do. Think about that the next time you're in an argument or see something to share on social media. You can have stances on things without depending on everyone else's word to fuel you, mainly because much of it isn't reliable. Once again, I'm not saying there isn't any dependable proof out there to support what you believe or feel. There may be. Sharing it instantly because it looks that way may be way more damaging to society than it is helpful to you. Consider watching the whole video, reading the whole article, taking some time to dig a bit deeper and seeing how much actual truth there is before sharing something just because it fits in with your personal worldview. And if that thing you share is bordering on false, consider not sharing it or just using your own words from your mouth, not someone else's. Say you saw an article or news story. Discuss where it's right and where it's wrong. Don't just take it all at face value. Ask questions. The worst thing you can do on social media is to share something without any explanation and let people assume that everything in that thing you shared is something you completely validate and believe. I got news for you. Real truth never comes easy. It takes effort to find, and most of the time we have to check our own personal situation in order to accept them. But at least if you can come to understandings with your friends, neighbors, loved ones, etc., you can take action where it can make a difference that makes you and everyone else happy, as opposed to taking action that has the potential to maybe make just you happy. This is Killer Cardinal DA7 reminding you to use your head, be nice to each other, and take the time to think. Talk to you later.
Do you feel it too? It's like crossing into another world that looks the same but feels different. An imposter world where the forest itself is watching.